He's the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Patriot Review. He has authored the Untold History of Canada book series and the Clash of the Two Americas trilogy. In 2019, he co-founded the Montreal-based Rising Tide Foundation. I'm talking about Matthew Ehret, so buckle up, here we go.
I'm Matthew Ehret, and you're listening to the Shaun Newman podcast.
Okay. Welcome to the Shaun Newman podcast. Today I'm joined by Matt Ehret. So first off, sir, thanks for hopping on.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Shaun.
You know, one of the wonderful things about a podcast is I interview somebody and then they're like, oh, you got to have this person on. And then I interview that person and they're like, oh, you got to have this person on. So this all started back with my brother suggesting Tom Luongo and then led me to Alex Craner, which has led me to you. So I don't know where this ends, but I'm having a little bit of fun along the way and learning a lot. And so I guess for the audience, maybe they know who Matt Ehret is, but let's assume they don't. I'll let you have a bit of the floor here, and let's hear about a little bit about Matt, and we'll jump off from there.
Sure, yeah. I mean, in the quickest possible way, I guess I could say my bio. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Patriot Review. It's an online news magazine. I began back in 2012. I'm also the co-founder and director of the Rising Tide Foundation as a nonprofit organization with my wife here in Montreal. Cynthia Chung, she's also a writer at Strategic Culture with me. It's a Russian news outlet. And the Rising Tide Foundation is a little bit more of an educational, cultural platform, whereas the Canadian Patriot and most of the other stuff we do is a lot of historical, geopolitical analysis material. I had originally started this back in 2012 because I had been on a project with a few like-minded people to piece together what the hell is Canada. We were operating in Canada. We had a little bit of political activism that we were doing with the Canadian outlet of the Larouche organization. It was maybe 8 or 9 people. And we were, talking about some big ideas with Canadian citizens, some Canadian policymakers, but we didn't really understand what was controlling Canada. Nobody did the work to understand the history of Canada. So there wasn't, and there was a bit of a disconnection because it was an American organization, but here we are with a small Canadian office, trying to tell Canadians that they have to impeach Barack Obama. And, it's like, you're trying to organize Canadians to do something like that. And there's a disconnection, right? You're not going to get any traction. So we figured we have to figure out how to customize these concepts so that it could empower both Canadians and again, policymakers. So for a couple of years, we were doing a lot of this work and we're making a lot of big discoveries on the hidden history of Canada, but we couldn't get anybody, including within the organization, to look at it. We couldn't get anybody outside of the organization to publish it or touch it because a lot of sacred cows were being busted up. So I decided, I might as well just start my own media platform, and that became an online journal. Well, actually, we were publishing it too, and it was getting some pretty good followers, a lot of activity. It got taken down for a couple of years, and I revived it in 2017 after Trump was elected, because there was all of a sudden a hunger for this sort of thing once again. And the discoveries that we made on history became a 4-volume book series that I published called The Untold History of Canada, volume 1 to 4, sort of going through the whole, like reconstructing the whole story from 1774 until the present, with a more critical eye to the Roundtable movement, certain British operations, because the idea was, all of the accepted history books assume that Canada is a thing, as if it exists as a nation state. And it's like when you actually look with a critical eye towards what's actually the oligarchical structures controlling our present and our past, you realize, no, Canada was never permitted to ever become an authentic nation state. It never was the case. There was always a deep state. There was always a shadow government tied to the crown, the Privy Council office, all of these weird Byzantine structures, always there, with certain key think tanks like the Roundtable movement, set up by Cecil Rhodes, Rhodes scholars who were installed to impose and maintain a certain policy over many generations. Just like in the United States, you can't really understand the worst of what the US did throughout the 20th century if you don't pay attention to these operations, which most people don't, unfortunately, highly interconnected with Canada. So anyway, that became that. And then the last thing I'll say is some of that research over the years also made a lot of material for a 3-volume a series of history books that I also wrote this time with my wife starting in 2019, called the Clash of the Two Americas, to get across more of an appreciation both for an international audience, but also for Americans, that there's not really one, like the USA after 1776 was never a final product that was just finished, but rather you always had like sort of these, just like after World War II, you have these these Nazi stay-behinds that were absorbed by U.S. intelligence and British intelligence to carry out the Cold War. That was called, like, I think it was given the name Operation Gladio. Sort of the same thing after 1783. You had sort of British loyalist stay-behinds masquerading as if they were American patriots, but always being loyal to the British Foreign Office with the mandate to undermine and destroy the United States from within. And that gave birth to things like Wall Street, most of the worst elements of U.S. intelligence after the death of McKinley. Thank you, baby. Sorry. After the death of McKinley in 1901. So you had things like the FBI set up, a lot of these other Masonic operations come into play here, always directed by, again, a British hand behind the scenes. And that became the entire 20th century. So again, that's the 3-volume Clash of the Two Americas. Soon to be four volumes in about a month or two. I'll have volume 4 up. So yeah, that's my quick, that's me.
You Canadian?
Yeah.
Whereabouts you from?
Montreal.
Montreal. All right. Quebec talking to a Saskatchewan boy. All right. I like it. Okay. This is what I was saying to the listener. Me and Matt were talking before we started, and I started going down your website, and it's superbly done. First off, like I was reading, I started listening, and I'm like, there's just like, I could spend, it feels like not an encyclopedia, Matt, but kind of, right? Like just, oh man. So if a listener wants to go do that, all the power to them. And I think I'm going to slowly start dabbling because it was fascinating. But for our time here, I'm going to try and pull us back to a couple of things you just said. But let's start when you start working in this, I think you said think tank or something like that, this group, as you started doing the research, did you have like, oh, I know what's actually going on? Or you were like, I don't know, green as at the gills as possible?
No, I knew that there was, I had already, I started doing this research in 2007, and I had been through my personal, taking the red pill thing, going down my rabbit hole.
What was your red pill? What happened to you?
That was when I was a university student, studying in fine arts. I was actually working on animation, film animation. I had already gotten a degree in illustration and design. So that was my path. I didn't really have an intellectual identity. I didn't like reading books. I was already 19, 20. I wasted a lot of time with everybody telling me, you're right brain. You're an artist type. You don't have to be analytical. So I was brainwashed by that garbage. And, so I found myself on a team, and part of what I had to do was piece together a small element that touched on 9/11 for a documentary. And I just decided to start watching a couple of, I didn't know anything about 9/11. I was maybe, 18 when it happened. It was, but I was sort of a believer in the accepted narrative. And so I downloaded a few lectures from BitTorrents. Remember that? BitTorrents. And
we gotta be close to the same age. What year did you graduate? Wow, how old are you?
I'm 39.
Yeah, 36 on this side. So you're just a smidge older than me. But yes, anyways, right. Carry on.
So yeah, that was for those younger than 30 right now. BitTorrents were something that woke up a lot of people who were 35 to 45. So yeah, basically downloaded a few of these lectures and had my mind blown by some people who were rather competent researchers and who challenged the big narrative. And at least they didn't give me, like, I didn't have a full sense of the picture, but that was my original crash. I was like, damn, everything's a lie. And so I went on that path for a couple of years, which just you just follow the thread, and everybody has, I think, a very similar set of experiences who've been through it that way. It doesn't take you long before you stumble on, okay, this didn't come about overnight, that there's an agency so powerful that has taken over a government right to the south of us, to the point that this thing is willing to kill its own people to get these political effects. And it's like that, again, it's not overnight. That this is something which you soon discover, okay, this goes back many generations. It's tied to the financial system. It's tied to Wall Street. And so you start piecing together, okay, the Federal Reserve story. And I'm still trying to, I didn't have a broad sense of hope, obviously, but at least I had more of a sense of like, okay, it's really bad and people are being mentally manipulated to walk into a slaughterhouse. So that bothered me. But I at a certain point, I stopped talking about it because I was just too far gone. I was like, I was really what you would call black pilled, and black pill just means, you've gone further than the red pill. You're just like, everything is controlled. There's never been hope. We're just perpetually screwed. They're too powerful.
Very nihilistic.
Very nihilistic. Yeah. They've got secret knowledge. Right? The big they have secret knowledge. They're so far above us. We're just try to just enjoy the show, eat your pizza, get by, So I was like, every time I was doing a pretty good job explaining what research I was doing to people in my world, if I did a really good job and I convinced them, I just made them depressed. And usually I was making people just think I was crazy. So I was like, neither one is useful. So I shut up about it. And I made a point that if I ever do come across an empowering way of looking at this, I'll talk about it again. But I spent about a year just keeping my mouth shut or longer. And that's where I was on a cigarette break. I was working a little job at Concordia University in Montreal, and I was on a break. And then that's where I saw one of these political tables that was hosted by that Canadian branch of the Larouche organization. And there was a few younger people with their signage, referring to stop the depopulation agenda. They had the literature, and I was like, okay, I could talk to you. So I had that conversation, and though I thought there were still things that they were completely wrong about, I was like, at least you're doing something, and you have at least acknowledged things that everyone else is ignorant to. So I was like, okay, I'll come around. I volunteered for a little bit at their organization, at their office, and I found that the ideas were really good overall. Like, there was a strong sense. And there was also this old guy, for those who don't know, Larouche is an older, well, he died in 2019 but at the age of 96. And I thought I was pretty well informed, but I'm like, this guy's been around politically, running for the presidency like 8 times. He was the advisor to like the Mexican government, the Lopez Obrador. He was the advisor to Indira Gandhi of India. I was like, this guy is such a force. How do I, who am pretty informed, not know about this figure? And every time I would bring up, hey, to one of my fellow conspiracy-minded friends, about this guy Larouche, I would get this knee-jerk reaction saying, yeah, it's a fascist cult, if they knew about him at all. And I was like, really? Because I'm looking at the ideas. It's actually pretty good ideas. And I'm like, what did you read that gave you this strong conviction? And it very quickly became they didn't read anything. It's just like this weird aura of gossip. And I would, go to Wikipedia and fascist cult. And I was like, wait a minute, what is Wikipedia? Like, why am I trusting them? So anyway, I realized very quickly, like, there were some very powerful forces that worked very hard to paint to create a mental electric fence around people's minds before they even looked at the name of Larouche. And when you actually look at his work since the 1960s, it's like pretty bold. He even went to prison in the late 80s in an American high security prison. When his whole organization was raided, he was shut down. 20 of his leading people were all put in prison. And the guy running it was Robert Mueller, the same guy who was in charge of taking down Trump under Russiagate. Same guy. He was up to his shenanigans back then too. So I was like,
why then are we so, like, when I hear that, I'm like, okay, so did nobody else pay attention to that, Matt? Like, why was he allowed back into another organization to help, or is it that powerful that people want him back in? And I'm talking Mueller.
I think the time that he was put in prison was 1988, and he was out. He was given 15 years at the age of 65. I think he was supposed to die in prison. He actually had a heart attack in there. But when he was let out in 1995, a lot had changed around the world. Like the world of 1998 and 1995 were two very different worlds. At that time, the Soviet Union had collapsed. The New World Order was announced publicly by Henry Kissinger and George Bush Sr. and Joe Biden in 1992. Like that was the end of history. The Soviet Union, before that, it was the bipolar age, and now it was the unipolar age was finally here. So I think that the biggest threat that Larouche was playing in '88 was he had already been talking about the inevitable meltdown of the Soviet system and the need to take that crisis as an opportunity to set up a new type of system of cooperation based upon large-scale infrastructure development, science, technology, and that's where he was getting a lot of resonance with leading figures in the private and public sector in Europe, Germany, Russia, US, who were all backing that approach, which was not in alignment with the thinking of those controlling the this New World Order agenda. Their idea is depopulation, eliminate the industrial productive base that supports and sustains human life. So their idea of it was no degrowth, deconstruct civilization, not this idea of overcoming limits to growth idea. That's bad. So I think they thought that they had enough control over the system such that when he was let out on bail in 1995, at that point, they were overconfident, I think, in their sense of power over everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things as just a common man sitting here and listening to it, one of the things I really struggle with is, and I've thought this question through so many different times, and we're not even talking a lifetime. We're talking, you're talking 90s to now, which is what, 32 years roughly, if you go from the start to the end of New World Order being announced publicly and everything you just said. And I always come back to, like, I so struggle with, is it possible for a family or families to carry out a vision of the future, like, consecutively through generations? Does that make sense? Like, with inherited wealth and knowledge, like, your parents taught you something, and then you have the choice to either go use it or not use it. Same with me, same with all these, you get the point. And money certainly puts you in a different playing field. Now, you mentioned one of the names that just obviously everybody just jumps on is, Biden. Oh, okay. So 30 years ago, he was right where he was, and now he's the president of the United States. So in a man's lifetime, when it comes to the New World Order, that seems like a logical, okay, he wants this. But is this extended back further than the last 30 years? Are we going back like 100 years? And is it possible to have multiple generations of single families carry out the idea, or is it just the idea can jump from family to family? Did that make at all sense?
No, that's a great question. That's the best configuration of that question I've ever encountered in my life. No, it was great.
Well, I appreciate that, because I've been thinking about this question for like 2 effing years trying to get it out of my mouth. So there you go. Fire away.
It paid off. That's a great, and it is the biggest reason why people today have been told there's no such thing as conspiracy theories, and conspiracy theorizing has become like synonymous with almost a bad word. Now they'll say, okay, most people will admit that there are local mini conspiracies. Even Chomsky, who denies that there are long-term conspiracy theories, will say, okay, but definitely it's not an accident that the corporate, the corporate elite that's running the media just happened to find themselves all in ownership of like all of the media, in a tiny coterie of hands. That's not an accident. That happened by a certain type of a design. But again, he will only allow like in a mini conspiracy, like it's very isolated in a time frame of maybe 20, 30 years, maybe 40 years, but nothing that is really connected to stuff that was happening in the 19th century or earlier. Like, forget about the idea that things happening in the 15th century could have any impact
on us today
as a causal nexus on the things happening today. I think differently. The reason, and I don't think it could happen just by some families. I don't think that I think a lot of the times, what's important is to properly take the time to define what we mean with oligarchical systems. Like, often people use the word empire lazily. Empire, run by, an alpha family or a few alpha families of nobles, and then like auxiliaries below that rape, loot, and pillage or something. You know, I don't know. Like there's very simplistic ideas of empire.